The covert agency outpost looked like any other tech startup nestled in the heart of New York City. Sleek glass walls, rows of computers, and young engineers hunched over their screens. But behind the facade of innovation and harmless coding, hidden beneath layers of encrypted security and secret protocols, was a team dedicated to tracking the world's deadliest threats. And tonight, 3 agents were about to break all the rules. In the dimly lit back room of the outpost, far from the prying eyes of the agency's new leadership, Alex, Karina, and Ashley met in secret. The air inside the small room was heavy with tension, the kind that spoke of forbidden decisions and dangerous consequences. "Everything's changed since the new command took over," Alex muttered, her eyes scanning the room as if someone might be listening. She leaned back in her chair, her fingers tapping nervously on the table. "Reassigned to paperwork while Black Dawn grows stronger. It's a joke." Karina sitting across from her didn't share Alex's nervousness. Her expression remained calm, though her fingers lightly traced the edge of her katana that rested on her lap, a habit she'd picked up after years of combat. "They're playing it safe, Alex. After everything that went down with Black Dawn, they're too scared to make bold moves." "But playing it safe is going to get more people killed." Alex's voice was sharp, frustration barely contained. "Ultranacious is out there, and they're pretending he's not." Ashley, who had been quietly listening, spoke up at last. Her voice was calm but carried the weight of leadership. "They don't want us making noise. They're restructuring, trying to tighten control, and we've become liabilities. They'd rather bury us under bureaucracy than risk another mission like New Haven." At the mention of New Haven, the room seemed to grow colder. None of them needed to revisit the details. The scars, both physical and emotional, still lingered from that disastrous mission. "And now," Alex added bitterly, "we're stuck behind a desk while the real enemy moves unchecked. We're the only ones who know ultranacious Eternus is planning something big." Ashley's eyes narrowed as she considered their situation. She had always been the cautious one, the one to weigh risks carefully before acting, but even she knew they couldn't afford to sit idle. Not now. "If we go rogue," she said slowly, "there's no turning back. We'll be on our own. No resources, no backup. Just us." "That's how it's always been," Karina replied, her voice steady. "The agency doesn't need to know everything we do. We've handled worse on our own." Alex leaned forward, her gaze intense. "Exactly. We're the best they've got, and they're too blind to see it. If we stay here, we're just waiting for the next disaster. If we leave, we might actually stop it." Ashley looked at them both, weighing her decision. She knew the stakes. They all did. The moment they walked out of that room, they'd become fugitives, hunted not just by Black Dawn, but by the very agency they'd sworn to protect. But staying felt worse than the alternative. It felt like surrendering. "All right," she said finally, her voice low but resolute. "We do this quietly. We keep our heads down, move fast, and don't make mistakes. Our first move will be New Orleans. There's been chatter about supernatural disturbances, could be Black Dawn remnants." Karina nodded. "I've already got contacts there. We can blend in, gather intel, and figure out if it's them. If Black Dawn is active in the city, we'll know soon enough." Alex smiled for the first time that night. It wasn't a smile of relief, but one of determination. They were taking control, doing what they did best. "So we're doing this?" Ashley stood, pulling her tactical jacket tighter around her shoulders. "We're doing this." The 3 agents stood in silent agreement, a shared understanding passing between them. They had fought side by side for years through blood and betrayal, and now they were about to face their most dangerous mission yet, without the agency's sanction. They weren't just breaking protocol, they were severing ties. As they prepared to leave, the room suddenly felt smaller, more confined, as though the walls themselves knew what they were about to do. But none of them hesitated. The path ahead was dangerous, but it was the only one left. Their first step would take them to the dark streets of New Orleans, a place where secrets and shadows thrived. If Black Dawn was there, they would find them, and this time there would be no red tape holding them back. New Orleans was alive with music and magic, the heartbeat of the city echoing in the night air. The trio moved through the narrow streets, blending seamlessly into the crowd of tourists and revelers. Jazz floated through the humid air, mixing with the scents of gumbo and spices, but beneath the vibrant pulse of the city, something dark stirred. Alex, Karina, and Ashley had slipped into their roles easily, posing as travelers just passing through. They walked past shops filled with voodoo trinkets and fortune tellers, their eyes scanning the streets for any sign of Black Dawn activity. New Orleans was a city where the line between the natural and the supernatural had always been thin, and it was the perfect hunting ground for those seeking to exploit ancient powers. Alex adjusted the brim of her hat, her eyes flickering from one passing face to another. "The chatter wasn't wrong," she murmured, keeping her voice low. "Something's happening here, I can feel it." Ashley, walking beside her, nodded subtly. "Keep it casual. The last thing we need is to spook anyone." Karina, always more comfortable in combat than covert operations, kept her hands shoved in her pockets, fingers brushing the hilt of a concealed blade. "Let's just hope we don't have to chase shadows all night." They had picked up rumours about strange occurrences around the outskirts of the city, faint whispers of dark rituals and unnatural events. Locals spoke of ghosts, curses and spirits that wandered the swamps, but it wasn't the dead they were hunting. It was the living. Black Dawn operatives who had surfaced in New Orleans, conducting rituals that drew on the city's ancient roots. "Anything on the scanner?" Karina asked, her voice betraying a hint of impatience. Alex checked the small device concealed in her bag, which monitored any unusual energy spikes or radio frequencies. "We're close. There's something irregular ahead." They followed the trail out of the bustling French Quarter and into the quiet, forgotten parts of the city. The streets narrowed, the noise of the city faded, and soon they stood before an old mansion. The structure loomed in front of them, its windows shattered and its once grand architecture crumbling under the weight of time. Vines crawled up the walls, and the iron gate was rusted with neglect. The locals avoided this place, and for good reason. "This feels like the right kind of wrong," Karina muttered, drawing her blade. Ashley glanced at her, the corner of her mouth lifting slightly. "Stay sharp. We're not here to pick a fight, unless we have to." The three agents moved silently through the overgrown yard and slipped into the mansion's decaying interior. The smell of mold and rot was overwhelming, but beneath that, Alex caught the faint scent of burning incense, something pungent and acrid, like sulfur. "They're here," Alex whispered. Her pulse quickened as she led them deeper into the mansion. "This way." They descended into the basement through a hidden stairwell, carefully moving down the creaking steps. At the bottom, a faint light flickered, illuminating the stone walls with an eerie glow. As they approached the chamber, the sound of chanting grew louder, the words foreign and ominous. Peering through the crack in the door, Alex saw them. 6 Black Dawn operatives, dressed in dark robes, gathered around a stone altar. Strange symbols were etched into the floor, glowing with a faint red light. In the center of the altar lay a human skull, and around it, burning candles flickered wildly, as if caught in a gust of wind that wasn't there. "They're in the middle of something serious," Alex said, her voice low and urgent. "We need to disrupt this, but we can't rush in blind." Ashley nodded, quickly assessing the situation. "We hit hard and fast, but we need intel too. If there's any clue about their next move, we can't leave without it." Karina grinned, already eager for the fight. "I've got your back. Just say the word." The plan was simple. Alex would go in first, under the guise of a lost traveller. Her expertise in undercover work was unparalleled, and they needed to know what Black Dawn was planning. Ashley and Karina would hang back, ready to strike if anything went wrong. Alex straightened her jacket and took a deep breath before stepping through the doorway, adopting a confused expression. "Hey! Is this where the ghost tour is?" The chanting stopped abruptly as all eyes turned to her. The leader, a tall man with sharp features and cold eyes, stepped forward. "You're not supposed to be here," he said, his voice dripping with menace. Alex raised her hands in mock surrender, her heart pounding in her chest. "Whoa, I didn't mean to interrupt. I was just looking for the tour, and I must have taken a wrong turn. I'll just go—" Before she could finish, two operatives grabbed her by the arms, pulling her toward the altar. "Let's see what you really know," the leader sneered. As they dragged her closer, Alex's mind raced. She needed to stay calm, to gather as much information as possible. Her eyes darted to the altar, where the symbols glowed brighter now, and then to the dark book lying open on a nearby table. She could make out a few words, but the language was ancient, unfamiliar. Suddenly, a figure moved in the shadows, Karina. Without hesitation, she struck, taking down one of the guards in a blur of motion. Ashley followed, her movements swift and calculated as she disarmed another operative. Chaos erupted in the chamber. The operatives scrambled, caught off guard by the sudden attack. Alex used the distraction to break free, slipping into the shadows and grabbing the dark book from the table. Karina's combat skills were a force of nature, each strike deliberate, each movement precise. She moved like a predator, her blade cutting through the air with lethal efficiency. Beside her, Ashley directed the chaos, calling out orders and keeping them focused. "Alex, what do you have?" Ashley shouted, dodging a wild swing from one of the remaining operatives. Alex frantically flipped through the pages of the book, her eyes scanning the text. "They're summoning something," she said breathlessly. "There's a necromancer in the Bayou, someone with ties to Ultranacious." "We need to move," Karina shouted, finishing off the last operative with a swift strike. "More could be coming." With the operatives incapacitated, the trio quickly gathered what they could from the lair. Alex stuffed the book into her bag, her mind racing with the implications of what she had read. This wasn't just about Black Dawn. It was about something far darker, something ancient that was waking in the Bayou. Ashley led the way out, guiding them through the mansion's crumbling halls and out into the night. The tension still hung thick in the air as they slipped back into the shadows of the city. "We head to the Bayou," Ashley said, her voice steady despite the growing threat. "If this necromancer has ties to Ultranacious, they're our next lead." Alex nodded, her thoughts still on the dark rituals they had interrupted. Whatever they were summoning, we can't let it happen. As they vanished into the night, the oppressive weight of what lay ahead pressed down on them. New Orleans was only the beginning. The hunt for Ultranacious Eternus had truly begun. The Bayou lay before them like a living creature, shrouded in fog and filled with the slow breath of ancient, unseen forces. The air was thick with humidity, carrying the scent of damp earth and decaying vegetation. Spanish moss dripped from the gnarled trees like fingers reaching down to the swamp below. Every step Alex, Karina, and Ashley took seemed to be swallowed by the mud, the weight of the Bayou's magic pressing in on them from all sides. "Feels like the swamp's alive," Karina muttered, her hand instinctively resting on the hilt of her katana, ever ready. "It's watching us." Ashley moved cautiously ahead, her eyes scanning the murky water and dense foliage. The mist clung to them, making it hard to see more than a few feet in any direction. "That's because it probably is. Madame Laveau doesn't want visitors, especially not uninvited ones." The environment resisted their every step. The twisted roots of the trees seemed to shift beneath their feet, as though the land itself was testing them, daring them to move deeper into its secrets. Strange sounds echoed through the mist, whispers in a language they didn't understand, the occasional splash of something unseen moving through the water, and the distant croak of unseen creatures. "Are we sure this is the way?" Alex asked, glancing down at her wrist device, which had long since lost its signal. Nothing's showing up on the tracker. Ashley didn't slow down. We're close. Trust me. This isn't about tech. This is about intuition and a bit of survival instinct. The Bayou had always been a place where the rules of the natural world bent to the will of something older, something untamed. And in the heart of it, hidden away from prying eyes, lay Madame Laveau's cabin, a place not marked on any map, known only to those who dealt in the dark arts. It was a place whispered about in hushed tones, a place where magic ran deeper than the water and the trees themselves carried secrets. Hours passed as they navigated through the thick mud, avoiding sinkholes and the supernatural hazards that lurked in the shadows. Will-o'-the-wisps flickered in the distance, leading them astray before disappearing into nothingness. Enchanted quicksand nearly swallowed them whole, its surface shimmering with a hypnotic pull. But finally, through the dense mist and tangled trees, the outline of a small, weathered cabin came into view. The structure looked as though it had stood there for centuries, untouched by time, its wooden walls bowed slightly under the weight of its own history. Powerful wards were etched into the ground around it, glowing faintly in the fading light. Strange symbols hung from the branches of nearby trees, their purpose clear: keep out. This place, Alex whispered, feeling the weight of the magic in the air. It's like the Bayou itself is alive here. It is, Karina replied, her voice low. Everything here is part of the spell. As they approached the cabin, they were stopped dead in their tracks by an invisible force. The air around them shimmered, and Karina, always attuned to the unseen, raised her hand. It's a barrier, she said. Strong magic. She knows we're here. Ashley stepped forward, speaking into the mist. We're not here to harm you, Madame Laveau. We seek your help. An eerie silence followed. For a moment, it felt as though the whole Bayou held its breath, waiting. Then, slowly, the door to the cabin creaked open, revealing the silhouette of an older woman, her form draped in shadow. Her eyes, sharp and glinting with ancient wisdom, fixed on the trio as she stepped into the doorway. Madame Laveau was formidable. Her presence alone seemed to command the air around her, bending it to her will. She was wrapped in a dark cloak, her face lined with the weight of centuries. Her eyes, though, were alive with magic, with knowledge, with the kind of power that made even the bravest men falter. What brings you to my domain, trespassers? Her voice was smooth, but there was an edge to it, an unspoken warning. You seek knowledge, but your hearts are heavy with fear and desperation. Tell me, why should I help you? Ashley took a deep breath, stepping forward cautiously. She met Madame Laveau's gaze head-on, though she could feel the weight of it pressing down on her. We're here to stop Black Dawn. They're planning to summon ultranacious Eternus to bring him back to Earth. We can't let that happen. Madame Laveau watched them, her expression unreadable, her hands folded neatly in front of her. She said nothing, only stared into each of them, as if weighing their souls. Many have come before you, she said after a long pause, seeking power, seeking revenge. What makes you different? Why should I help those who come from a broken world? Alex, sensing the opportunity, stepped forward. She spoke quietly, but her words carried the weight of their losses. We don't seek power. We don't seek revenge. We've lost too much already. Our friends, our agency. We just want to stop more destruction before it's too late. Madame Laveau's eyes softened at the mention of their sacrifices. She studied them for a long moment before nodding slightly. The Demon King's shadow stretches far, even here in the Bayou. His corruption seeps into the land, twisting the natural order to his will. But, she paused, her gaze shifting between the three of them. I see truth in your eyes, and a fire that will not be easily extinguished. She stepped aside, gesturing for them to enter. The air inside the cabin was thick with the scent of incense and herbs. Candles burned low on a small altar adorned with bones, charms, and strange ancient symbols. The walls were lined with shelves filled with books, some bound in leather, others in materials the trio dared not question. Jars of strange ingredients lined the surfaces, and the very air hummed with magic. Madame Laveau moved to the altar, lighting a new candle as she spoke. Ultranaceous's plan is more dangerous than you realize. He left fragments of his essence scattered across the world, hidden in dark artifacts. These artifacts, if brought together, will create a portal strong enough to bring him back from his exile. She turned to face them, holding an ancient, dusty tome in her hands. The Black Dawn is already hunting these artifacts. If they succeed in retrieving them all, they will summon Ultranaceous back, and your world will fall into darkness. Opening the tome, she revealed a map of the world, marked with several key locations. Each location pulsed with power, and each was guarded by fierce protectors, creatures loyal to Ultranaceous. These artifacts are tied to the elements: fire, water, earth, air, spirit, and shadow. You must retrieve them before Black Dawn does. But be warned, each artifact is protected by powerful curses and guardians who will not be easily defeated. She handed the map to Ashley and turned to Alex, giving her a small enchanted compass. This will guide you to the artifacts, but only if your intent is pure. If your heart falters, it will lead you astray. The weight of their task settled over them like a heavy fog. They would have to travel across the globe facing guardians, curses, and the relentless pursuit of Black Dawn, all without the agency's support. Before they left, Madame Laveau gave them one last piece of advice, her voice tinged with an ominous warning. The journey ahead will not only test your skills, but your souls. Stay true to your cause, for it is the only light in the coming darkness. The trio left the bayou behind, the distant call of the swamp creatures fading into the night as they made their way back to the city. The path ahead was perilous, but they had no choice. Each of them carried their own demons, and as they prepared for the next leg of their journey to the catacombs of Rome, they knew that the battles to come would test more than just their strength.